Yeah, it's right after your opening statement.
We'll pull that out. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone and call to order this hearing of the Government Operations Subcommittee of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee of the House of Representatives. The subject of today's hearing is examining the skyrocketing problem of identity theft related to tax fraud at the Internal Revenue Service. The order of business today will be, we will begin with opening statements from members, and then we'll hear from our witnesses. We have 4 witnesses today, and I'll introduce them later. And I would remind members, it looks like we're going to have votes commencing about 9:15, which gives us to about 9:30. So we will again try to get through this, and maybe most of our witnesses. We will then recess and return probably for questions at that point. So with that, Chairman Issa and myself, we usually start these hearings by saying that just generally that we have a responsibility to investigate problems with our federal government, for lack of a better term, of some of those problems. We call them scandals or wasteful spending or conduct by federal agencies or employees. And this is not an opportunity to say to pick on IRS, but an opportunity to follow up actually on this matter. We've had some 4 hearings. I was given the list of hearings, and they date back, I don't know, Mr. Conley, did you participate in some of those before? So this is not a new scandal or problem. It's something that we've seen as an issue for some time. Unfortunately, too, you'll hear in just a second as I cite some of the issues at hand, it isn't resolved and it hasn't gotten any better. Unfortunately, we've heard lately a lot about phony scandals and the IRS, and some of the things that we've had to deal with are not phony scandals. Even the leaders in the administration have conceded that in the past, particularly in regard to some of the targeting by IRS, not brought to our attention by the Inspector General and other members of Congress. We also, as you may recall, just briefly, looked at the conferences in a previous hearing of wasteful spending on IRS conferences, and I think they were spending about $45 million in one year. After we began some of the revelations with GSA and others, we discovered in that hearing, again, wasteful spending that exceeded what we saw and everyone was appalled at with GSA. And that review of that matter has resulted in going from $45 million to about $5 million, considerable saving for the taxpayers. And then I think all of us were stunned when we heard about the, and I don't know of a better term than scandal, with the IRS improperly awarding contracts to Strong Castle. I'm sure the members were here that heard Tammy Duckworth, one of our war heroes, question the witness who had scammed the system, and also IRS getting $500 million worth of contract potential under false pretenses with his veterans' disability. So again, we have, I think, an important responsibility to look at these matters. Unfortunately, IRS has had a number of problems, and this one that we're looking at today continues. The incidence of identity theft related to tax fraud, now listen to this, And some of this data is very interesting. It's grown from 456,000 cases in 2009 to an estimated 1.9 million cases in 2013. That's a 416% increase. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration estimates that IRS could issue, in fact, that this problem could balloon in the coming years to $21 billion in fraudulent returns over the next 5 years. Some of the estimates are in 2011, as much as a whopping $5 billion went out the door being paid in potentially fraudulent returns. In fact, this has become such a lucrative business for criminals that criminals, in fact, are leaving the drug dealing trade, and we're told, and now getting into applying and also asking for these fraudulent returns from IRS. So it's being said that tax fraud is actually taking work away from drug dealers because it's easier and safer to scam the IRS than it is to sell drugs. Sad part about this for the average person when they do file these fraudulent return claims is that it takes more than a year in most instances to try to get their identity problems resolved, sometimes to try to get their credit restored, and very often to actually just get their lives back together. They're left in limbo, and it doesn't appear that IRS has a means of actually changing what's going on. They've made some attempts, but obviously, if you just look at the increases, the dramatic increases, whatever action IRS appears to be taking is not working. We've gone again from 456,000 to almost 2 million cases. So they've failed to curtail this rip-off of the public. In reviewing this matter, I found that some states have been able to institute some fairly simple matters, and we may ask about what, again, they're doing that has worked and hasn't worked. But Georgia has taken some action. Some of the state revenue departments have taken action, and we'll hear more about that, hopefully, that has successfully stopped people from illegally accessing taxpayer cash. The IRS has complained of a lack of resources and said it need another $22 million to examine all cases of potential fraud. I've heard the numbers of 90,000 to 100,000 IRS employees. Maybe Mr. Werfel, you can tell me how many you have. But we do know from our review some 21 units of IRS are engaged now in tackling this problem. And again, it's gotten worse, not better. So again, this subcommittee has held 4 previous hearings on this subject in the 112th Congress. My colleague, the ranking member, I think, participated in some of those. I know he's as interested in getting to the bottom of this as I am, and also correcting it, because it is a very serious situation. So with those opening comments, I'll yield now to the ranking member, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing. There have been a lot of hearings about IRS on various and sundry matters, but this is one that touches almost every taxpayer potentially, and I really want to thank you for holding this hearing. And as you indicated in the previous Congress with former Chairman Platts and Ranking Member Ed Towns, we had a series of hearings on this subject, and I attended every one of them. You know, as you indicated, I think according to the IRS Taxpayer Advocate, identity theft jumped 650% between 2008 and 2012. And as you indicated, there were almost 1.9 million incidents of identity theft and fraudulent refunds. Maybe the unintended good news is it's cutting down on drug dealing, as you indicated. But, this is unbelievably disruptive to constituents. And if I recall, and Mr. Werfel will correct my memory if wrong, but at the last hearing this subcommittee had under Chairman Platts, I think the statistic was there were only 4 prosecutions or convictions for this identity theft. Now, when you have 1.9 million identity thefts going on, that is an epidemic, and the number of prosecutions and convictions not acceptable. It's profoundly disruptive to our constituents. In my own district, a gentleman and a wife filed their 2010 tax returns electronically in April of 2011. They fell victim to tax-related identity thieves. Their tax filing was rejected because someone else had used their Social Security number and received a refund before they had filed their legitimate return. My constituent tried for 2 years to resolve the theft of this tax refund. He spoke with 6 different individuals at IRS between April and August of 2011 and was given 6 different timelines for the issue to be resolved, ranging from 6 to 8 weeks to a year. Further, the IRS provided conflicting information about forms to fill out, where to send the forms, and whether he should follow up with the IRS or wait for the IRS to contact them. In November of 2011, they received their refund and thought the issue was resolved. In May of 2012, 2 of my constituents tried to refinance their home and were rejected by the mortgage company because the company was using fraudulent IRS documents. When my constituent called the IRS, they stated, "Everything looks fine here. We can't explain it, and if there's a problem, we can't really do anything about it." After many ill-fated pursuits at clearing up the situation, the gentleman eventually gave up in frustration, his problem left unresolved, and refinancing in his home. Obviously, that's unacceptable. To be fair, the IRS recognizes this fact and is implementing reforms to enhance its efforts to combat identity theft by adopting a 3-pronged approach. The first prong is prevention, which means stopping this type of tax fraud from being successful in the first place. Clearly, given 1.9 million incidents, much more work needs to be done in this area. We seem to be losing the battle. The second prong is providing taxpayer services for those who have been the victims of identity theft. This is a significant focus for the IRS, but again it appears the agency is falling short. I can just tell you, based on constituent work in my office, satisfaction is not a prevalent theme among constituents. For example, an audit by TICTA sampled 17 different identity theft cases and found that the average time it took for those cases to be resolved was 414 days. Unacceptable. The third prong of IRS's approach is catching and convicting the criminals who committed these crimes. This is a critically important step and one in which we are failing. If we can step up enforcement, obviously it deters tax-related identity theft and protects our constituents. I'm interested, Mr. Chairman, in learning more about the IRS's efforts on this 3-pronged approach, including examining success stories as well as challenges still to be faced. I'd also like to hear more about how customer service is being improved to prevent the bureaucratic nightmare that constituents as well as millions of other Americans face every year. This year, as with every year, taxpayers face a number of issues and obstacles as they try to file their returns. I look forward to working with the IRS to implement corrective actions that will strengthen taxpayer assistance initiatives during what can be a very difficult time for many citizens. I hope today we have a productive discussion about how we're going to achieve this goal in light of this massive problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Yield to the Vice Chairman, Mr. Meadows, gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing. Thank each one of you for being here as we look forward to your testimony and we deal with this. Over the course of this year, it cannot be denied that the IRS has been plagued with a wide range of scandals. And while many of these issues have been highlighted, an ongoing problem, which seems to have flown under the radar, continues to exist here at the IRS, is this issue of tax fraud and identity theft and how it relates. And I didn't realize how big the problem was until I talked to a few stakeholders. And as I started talking to them and as they started identifying the issue, I was dumbfounded by the amount of tax fraud that exists. and really the potential for it to even be exacerbated with the new subsidy that we've got coming in with ACA and the Obamacare. If you've got a subsidy issue, and we're looking at really self-identifying who qualifies, it even presents a greater challenge. Identity theft, tax fraud has increased exponentially over the past 5 years, to the tune of 650%. And when we start to look at that, TIGTA, who will testify here today, estimates that there could be as much as $21 billion, that's billion with a B, in fraudulent tax returns over the next 5 years if the problem is not addressed. And they say that estimate is conservative. As I talked yesterday to a stakeholder, he shared a couple of different stories without sharing the details of just massive tax returns that comes in and taking advantage of the tax system that we have, and yet thousands of returns filed on the same day with Social Security numbers that are legitimate. And then we see this, but that is one area, and we're having to police that in the private sector. So we need to really look at a solution where the IRS steps up and identifies this, corrects the problem, or we'll be sitting here 12 months from now with an even bigger problem that is greater than $21 billion. So I thank each of you for being here. I thank the chairman for calling this important hearing, and I'm looking forward to your testimony.
Any other members have opening statements? Mr. Cummings?
I'll be very brief because I know we're going to have votes in a minute. I just want to make sure that we are aiming towards the problem. We can have motion, commotion, emotion, and no results. And the problem just gets worse. And so I'm looking forward to the testimony, but I'm also looking forward to solutions. Arguing here and arguing there and not helping taxpayers avoid being victims, and not addressing the issue of those who will take advantage of a system that may have some holes in it, and those who spend day in and day out trying to figure out how to maneuver to extract something that don't belong to them. Those are the issues that we have to address. If we can send a man to the moon, we ought to be able to resolve these issues. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Jordan?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Then we have time to probably get one or two of our witnesses in. Let me introduce them. Again, we have the Honorable Daniel Werfel, Acting Commissioner of the IRS. We have Ms. Nina Olson, the National Taxpayer Advocate at the Taxpayer Advocate Service. Mr. Michael McKinney is the Acting Deputy Inspector General for Audit at the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. And Mr. Douglas McGinty is the State Revenue Commissioner of Georgia, and we welcome all of you. As is customary, we swear in our witnesses, so if you stand, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to present to this committee and subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? The witnesses all answered in the affirmative. We'll let the record reflect that. Yes?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Could I just inquire, is it the intention of the Chair to hear Mr. Werfel first and then break for the...
I think we could do that. We can fit him in nicely. We still have 11 minutes, so we could give him at least 6.
And I'm informed we have 9 votes, Mr. Chairman.
And so we will recess for the appropriate time and break, and then come back, and we'll hear the rest of the witnesses. So with that, and also members will have 7 days to submit opening statements or extraneous material for the record without objection, so ordered. Welcome back, Mr. Werfel. I asked you earlier how much longer you'd be there until your successor, I guess, is just named today. But thank you for coming, and you're recognized, and again, welcome.
Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to update you on the actions we are taking at the IRS to combat refund fraud and help victims of identity theft. Refund fraud caused by identity theft is one of the biggest challenges facing the IRS today, and the harm it inflicts on innocent taxpayers is a problem that we take very seriously. The IRS has a comprehensive identity theft strategy focusing on preventing refund fraud, investigating these crimes, and assisting taxpayers victimized by identity theft. The agency's work on identity theft and refund fraud touches nearly every part of the organization. The IRS expanded these efforts for the 2013 filing season to better protect taxpayers and help victims. More than 3,000 IRS employees are currently working on identity theft, more than double the number at the start of the previous filing season. Our ability to detect fraud and stop false returns before issuing a refund continues to grow. We have expanded the number and quality of our identity theft screening filters, and already this year we have suspended or rejected more than 4.6 million suspicious returns, which approaches the total of 5 million for all of 2012. Our criminal investigations have increased as well. We have opened roughly 1,100 identity theft investigations so far in fiscal year 2013, which is already more than all of 2012. We are also improving our efforts to assist taxpayers who are victims of identity theft. Last year, we made a number of programming and procedural enhancements that enable us to move faster to identify accounts with a high potential for identity theft. Cases generated as a result are reassigned for review more quickly than in the past. So far this year, we have closed more than 565,000 cases. That is more than 3 times the number of identity theft cases resolved at the same time last year. Other procedural enhancements are helping us reduce delays in releasing funds to the legitimate filer in cases where duplicate returns are filed. As a result, taxpayers who became victims this fiscal year are receiving their refunds and having their problems resolved in less than 120 days, far more quickly than in previous years. While this is an improvement, we are continuing to find ways to shorten this time and to ease the burden on these victims. But barriers to further progress on identity theft do exist. One is the sheer volume and complexity of these crimes. Another is the need to further upgrade our technology in order to implement improvements such as more sophisticated filters and better taxpayer authentication procedures. Yet another barrier to further progress is our difficult budget environment. The work we are already doing on refund fraud and identity theft involves a difficult balance of resources and staffing at a time when our budget has been reduced by $1 billion since fiscal year 2010. This includes a reduction of $618 million this year alone as a result of sequestration. The IRS has responded to these budget reductions by becoming more efficient and cost-conscious. One result of our efforts to reduce costs is that full-time staffing at the IRS has declined by more than 8% since fiscal year 2010, or about 8,000 positions. Against this backdrop, our need for additional resources to fight refund fraud caused by identity theft has forced very critical performance trade-offs. The progress that the IRS has made against identity theft would not have been possible without directing resources away from other enforcement activities and our service programs. The Administration's fiscal year 2014 budget request provides for an increase in funding that will let us continue to make progress against identity theft while also allowing us to continue our enforcement activities and maintain reasonable levels of customer service. Conversely, without this additional funding, we would face difficult choices, and the situation would become even more serious if we were to incur additional budget cuts. We would no longer be able to sustain our current level of effort on identity theft without significantly weakening other programs. Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, members of the subcommittee, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to take your questions.
What we're going to do, since we have 5 minutes before the vote, is we will recess at this time, and then there'll be at least 45 minutes of voting. We have 9 votes. That brings us up to at least 10:15. So I would expect everyone to be back here by then, and we will start immediately, I hope, 10 minutes after the beginning of the last vote on the floor for members' purposes. So with that, the subcommittee stands in recess.